What's up YouTube, Jeff back again from DopeTechDaily.com. Today I'm bringing you guys my official full review of the OnePlus 5. Now I've been using this phone for about a month, a little over a month. This is the 8GB, 128GB version in the Midnight Black colorway. As you guys know, my full reviews are typically pretty long, so I'll drop an outline below in the description so you can skip around if you don't want to watch the whole video. I'll also have a link to my full written notes, which are here in a Keep document. They'll be in a Google Doc below, so you can find the link in case you missed something, you want to come back and revisit it. This is basically what I'll be going through, are my written thoughts, but in video form. So let's get right to it. I'm going to talk about the design, the build quality of the OnePlus 5 first. Now, if you look at the very front of the OnePlus 5, it'd be very hard to tell the difference between this phone and the OnePlus 3 and the OnePlus 3T. It looks very, very similar. Fingerprint sensor in the same location. Bezels pretty much have the same size overall. If you look along the sides, there also really aren't any noticeable changes here. You've got volume rocker right there. You've got the very nice alert slider, which is definitely one of my favorite parts of OnePlus's overall design language. I think every Android phone should have this. It's super convenient. And then, of course, the power button over here on the side. So from the front, they didn't really do anything radical. Did they really need to? Probably not, because they're not trying to compete in that super high-end space with the design champions like Samsung and Apple. But if they keep creeping the price up, they're definitely going to need to do something. I hope that next year they'll slightly change the design of the front a little bit. I'm not saying they have to go with this super tall 18:9 aspect ratio curved screen, but they could definitely change things up a little bit to freshen it up. People like a little bit of change from year to year, especially your hardcore fans that are upgrading every single year with the new flagship that you release. Now, if you look around the back of the OnePlus 5, you definitely notice some changes from the 3 and the 3T. They're really not that many. There's just two main changes. The first one is the dual camera at the top, which was one of OnePlus's biggest selling points in their overall keynote. And of course, we'll talk about that later when I get to the camera review. The logo, everything else looks the same as the Midnight Black OnePlus 3T, which I unboxed. I'll drop a link below if you guys want to check that out. The other noticeable change is the slight curvature on the back of the phone. I talked about this in my unboxing of the OnePlus 5. It is very nice, and it makes it easier to hold and grip in your hand. It's a little slippery, but it definitely contours to your hand better, and I think I like it overall. So OnePlus made that very subtle change, which is difficult to see in photos, but it is more rounded around the edges here. It's not quite as square. Everything about the phone is more rounded, and that's definitely something I like. So overall, I think the phone is built very well. The only thing I really have a complaint about is the power button, and I talked about this in one of my previous videos on the OnePlus 5. The power button on mine is a little loose, and you can kind of hear a little bit on video it moving around. So it's not a huge problem, but it's something I've noticed and had this issue on my past OnePlus phones. It hasn't really degraded over time on my other phones, so I don't expect it to break or anything. It's just annoying whenever I use the phone naked. The actual volume rocker and the alert slider are super solid, so not really sure what the overall issue is with the power button. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the design, the build. I'd like to see them change things up a little bit next year, but I think for now, in the price category they're in, should be fine. The only other thing I wanted to mention here in the build quality section is the waterproofing, or lack thereof. I think one key place where OnePlus can improve is by adding waterproofing and IP rating, maybe IP67, IP68, if they want to compete in the flagship space. I have a real big feeling, and I'll talk about this more later in the video, that we're going to see a OnePlus 5T at the end of the year, and maybe OnePlus just held off on the waterproofing so they could add that into the OnePlus 5T and then have a compelling feature. So those are my thoughts on the design, the build quality. The next thing on here is the display. So OnePlus didn't really change much about the display on this particular phone. They decided to go with a 1080p AMOLED panel as they have in the past. And on the surface, there's really nothing wrong with the panel. It's fine in terms of it has decent brightness, it has pretty good colors, pretty good contrast, but there's nothing really wowing about the panel overall. It does have Gorilla Glass 5 on the front of the display. I do maintain that Gorilla Glass 5 actually scratches a little easier than 3 and 4. It's probably hard to pick up on the camera, but up here in the top corner, I've got a few scratches, very small surface scratches that are starting to form on my phone. I've found Gorilla Glass 5 easier to scratch. It's definitely more resistant to breaks when you drop the phone, but the scratching seems to be a problem. Getting back to the quality of the panel, I mean, there's really no huge complaints. The only thing is, if you compare this to an AMOLED panel from Samsung, and I know a lot of people are going to say it's not fair because they're not really in the same class. I mean, the vibrance of color that you get, I mean, these are both pretty colorful wallpapers, and also the black of the blacks is just ridiculous. I mean, you can see this is a black wallpaper backdrop on this one and this phone, and on the S8 Plus, the blacks are just so much deeper. So the overall contrast isn't nearly as good as a Samsung AMOLED panel. I don't really care too much about the resolution. It'd be nice to see them bump it up to 2560 by 1440 next year, which I think they probably will do. But I think the brightness and the contrast are the two things that are the biggest deal. The brightness is also nowhere near as bright as a Samsung panel. You can even see that again if I do. I'm not trying to make this an S8 versus OnePlus video, but you can see here just on auto brightness how much brighter the Galaxy S8 Plus gets just under my studio lights. And that's the same case outside. You're not going to get great visibility. The viewing angles are fine for the panel overall. They're not going to win any awards. I think OnePlus does need to improve the display next year. One thing I do give them high marks for is their inclusion of the DCI-P3 calibration mode. So if you go into display in settings, you can actually get a little bit truer tone for the colors if that's something that you're interested in. So go in here, screen calibration, it's right there, DCI-P3. That's going to give you a little bit more true to life colors than the default, which has got a little more saturated colors. Most people seem to prefer saturated colors, but if you're one of those purists that has to have true to life color, this is definitely a nice thing for you. So again, overall, I hope they'll improve next year, give us a QHD panel, and then go through and give us higher brightness and contrast, which would be fantastic. Now, I don't really want to spend a bunch of time talking about this jelly effect, but to review the OnePlus 5 without talking about it would be a little remiss, so I'm going to mention it here. I noticed it after a long time testing. It wasn't something that bothered me in my day-to-day use. So you're not going to notice it on this particular video, but I'm just illustrating where most people notice it on things like scrolling their Twitter feed. And I took some 120 frames per second video and did a slowdown on myself to make sure I could actually see it, and I could, but on a day-to-day basis, it's not something I notice. When I'm navigating Phoenix or Flamingo like this, it's not something that bothers me. So whether or not this is a problem for you is going to depend on your own personal vision, your own personal preferences. You know, there are a lot of weird things that bother me that might not bother other people about phones, and at the end of the day, the jelly effect falls into that category. Now, I do think that OnePlus should address this publicly and perhaps be more willing to work with people that are experiencing this, that have a problem, but that's a different story. We can save that for the very final point that I want to make in the video, which is about value and customer service. So that should pretty much it for the display. Speaker quality. The speaker on this phone is pretty good. I give OnePlus very high remarks in this particular regard. Overall, very big fan of it. So if you take a look here, the speaker, let's just turn it up so you guys can hear how loud it is at the top end.
But then I'll be home for the rest of the day. Okay? Okay. So, made it back from the lawyer.
Shout out to my friend Teddy Booscott. Big fan of his channel. Anyway, very nice clarity for the most part, except when you get to the very top. There's a little distortion when you're listening to music. But I'm a big fan of this speaker overall. Music, media. It's overall very good, even though it's just a bottom firing speaker here at the bottom, which normally, you know, we don't really expect too much great quality, clarity from this particular type of speaker. But overall, at the end of the day, I think OnePlus did a great job and got the maximum bit out of this. I would still recommend headphones for listening to music, but if you have to, the speaker can definitely do a good job. Software, which is one of the things I'm going to focus on the most here. I think OnePlus' strength lies in their software. They do a great job of leaving all of the key elements of Android intact and just adding some very nice overall just customizations that people really enjoy. A couple of things, they have the shelf here on the side. I'd personally like to be able to customize that to Google Now, but it's not intrusive. It gives you your recent apps, gives you some information about the phone here at the bottom, gives you your recent contacts there and some icons. You can also customize more of that. They give you some really nice customization options if you're like me and you like to customize the look of your phone. Specifically, if you long press on the lock screen or on the home screen there, you can go and change the icon pack in the stock launcher. So one of the main reasons that I always switch over to Action Launcher on all my phones is because I love to customize the icon pack. On here, I can do that already, and I don't have to switch launchers to do it. OnePlus gives me the option. By the way, this icon pack is called Ombre there for you guys who want to know. You can also turn the shelf on or off here, swipe down to access the quick settings, which is a nice thing. That's another thing that launchers often include, something that OnePlus builds in directly. And also app shortcuts. You can long press to show shortcut menu. For the app shortcuts, you can choose to turn that off as well. Another thing which you guys probably notice here on my phone is you've got the dark mode and you've got these little accents on the dark mode. So you can actually go in and customize all of that stuff in the settings. There's a ton of stuff that you can customize overall. In addition to that, you can customize gestures, status bars, buttons, so you can change the way the buttons are oriented for recent apps and back. You can do on-screen nav bar if you don't like the capacitive buttons, which is fantastic. You can swap the buttons, like I said, always enable the home button. There's just a ton of things you can do. The display, you have night mode and reading mode built in now. Night mode's been in here for a long time on most manufacturers. Reading mode will give you basically a grayscale when you go into an app. So for instance, like Android Central, I have it set to reading mode, so you can see it goes into black and white, reduces the strain of your eyes even on the daytime, which is a really nice feature that I like quite a bit. You guys can see that right in here, as I mentioned, you can change the theme to be a dark theme, which I really think all of Android needs, and I think Google's going to bring that to us eventually. You can see the purple here, the accent color, which is very nice. That's the one that I've chosen. You can choose a lot of other ones. Display size, font size, ambient display, just a ton of really good customizations. I think they took all the best stuff that other manufacturers have done and baked it in here. The gestures, which is really cool, now you can customize all of them. So draw the O, V, S, M, or W. You can actually launch a custom app, so you can do any app you want when you draw O. So if I want to set O to be a custom app that starts with O, I only have the icon pack, so it would be a little silly, but I could set the icon pack to launch when I draw the O on the screen. So overall, OnePlus has made amazing customizations. The software runs super smooth. You know, they revamped their launcher so that now it runs like the Pixel launcher with a swipe up, which is just as smooth as the Pixel XL, which I use on a daily basis. Fantastic. I love Oxygen OS. And if there's one reason to buy this phone, in my opinion, it's definitely the software. So I think I went through all of those. You've got, also customizable vibration feedback, which is fantastic. You can actually customize the vibration patterns for your calls, messages, etc. They also added a gaming mode. That's really nothing new because Samsung's had that for a while, but that'll put you in do not disturb mode while you're playing your games if you're a heavy gamer. One thing I do want to mention, which I don't like about the software, and I've left this here for the duration of the last 2 days so I could mention it, is these stupid ads. I don't know why, but OnePlus decided to push an ad for a survey to win a OnePlus 5 to people who already own a OnePlus 5. I'm using a OnePlus 5, so why push that to people who already have the phone? I don't know. They push this annoying, persistent ad to everyone who owns a 3, a 3T, and a OnePlus 5, apparently. That's not a good look. I'm not a huge fan. There was also a bug that caused the phone to reboot whenever people dialed 911. That's also been fixed. So OnePlus has been very proactive in fixing some of the really important issues as soon as they're aware of them. They work with Qualcomm to fix those issues. So the software, huge high marks there. I love the software that OnePlus puts into this phone. Performance and RAM management. This is one that a lot of people want to talk about because the specs are so beastly on this phone. Performance is a beast on here. I mean, I've played a ton of games. Super Mario Run, Injustice 2, One More Line, One More Dash, which are two of my favorite games. I've been playing Magikarp Jump, Pokemon Go on this phone, and it does really well. I haven't had any drop frames. Performance is good. No overheating whatsoever on the phone. I've been very impressed with that. The more impressive thing is that the 8 gigabytes of RAM, in my opinion, I've read a lot of people saying the 8 gigs of RAM don't really help them, but if you're a multitasker, the 8 gigs of RAM is actually pretty helpful. Not right now, I'm not even running that many apps, and I've got quite a few in memory, and I've gotten pretty close to actually running into the wall that you would see if you were actually using the 6 gig version. So it has 5.5 gigs available out of the box when you're running just your apps on the 6 gig version of this phone. I've gotten pretty close to that with the 8 gig version, but I've noticed absolutely no app reloads at all when it comes to my basic social media apps. And even when I was doing multitasking with games, etc., I had absolutely no problems. The apps all launch super fast. They all seem to stay in memory. There don't seem to be any app reloads or anything like that. I was thinking of doing a RAM management test to compare to the S8 If you guys are interested, let me know. I tried a few of those before and they didn't go so great, so I'm not 100% sure, but let me know. Overall, the specs, exactly what you would expect. A phone with these beastly specs, 8 gigs of RAM, Snapdragon 835, also just pushing a 1080p display. You get really amazing performance from this phone. And if you're interested in the performance, not to withstand the cheating that OnePlus supposedly did in the benchmarks, I don't care about that. The day-to-day use proves that this phone is quite a beast. I think that's pretty much it. Multitasking is great. Battery life and dash charging on this phone. So dash charging is still the fastest overall charging tech I've used. Of course, still USB Type-C here on the bottom. The problem with dash charge is that you have to buy the proprietary connector. I didn't bring it over here. It comes in the box, of course, but if you want to use dash charge at your office or other places, you're going to have to buy another power brick. And the big problem is that OnePlus did not make the phone compatible with the standards, Quick Charge 2.0, 3.0, etc. So if you just get a regular Quick Charge 2.0 or 3.0 power brick off Amazon, you're not going to get that same fast charge that you would expect. So it's great if you use the built-in charger that they include in the box, but if you want to buy third-party chargers, it could get expensive having to keep up with buying the same OnePlus charger over and over again. So a huge fan of dash charge. I just wish they would make it compatible also with the quick charge standard as well. The next thing is screen on time, battery life. The battery life hasn't been anything amazing on this phone. I've just been using the phone kind of sparingly today. We can check it out. This really never tells the story when on a review day because I've been doing multiple things. But if you look here, you can see sort of how it dissipates over time when it's sort of idle. Not too bad. I've been able to get a full day when I've been using it heavily. About an hour there, but I've been leaving it sort of idle for a little bit today. But I've been getting about 4 to 4.5 hours screen on time. That's with my regular usage, which I mentioned and put in the text document here. About 30 to 45 minutes of YouTube viewing, consistently answering YouTube comments, probably about 100 a day. A couple hours of Spotify listening on LTE on my commute every day, maybe 30 minutes of phone calls, and then lots of pictures during the review period. So 4 to 4.5 hours is in the middle of my battery life experience when it comes to flagships. I still get about 5 to 5.5 hours on the Galaxy S8 Plus. The LG G6 is a little bit worse than the OnePlus 5, so it's kind of in the middle between these flagships, but I would say it gets most people through the day. I'm a, heavy to moderate heavy user, so most people who are just going to use this for basic social media, they're not going to reply to 100 comments a day on their YouTube channel, and they're also not going to do as much picture taking as I was during the review period. So that's something to keep in mind. I didn't find the battery life to be too great, and I didn't find it to be a huge problem either. The fingerprint scanner, this is another place where the OnePlus 5 truly excels. This is the fastest front-mounted fingerprint scanner I've ever seen. You barely graze the fingerprint scanner. You can see my finger just barely going onto the scanner there, and it reads it. It's crazy. So you can get your finger pretty much not even on the scanner fully, and it'll do it. Only if you go to the far edge will it reject it. That's the only time. I've tested trying how much I can put my finger here and see if it'll still do it. You can get about half of your finger on there. It'll still unlock. Now that could be a problem if you don't mean to unlock your phone, it accidentally unlocks. I haven't seen that happen too much. Overall, I think the fingerprint scanner is one of the most important things and impressive things about the OnePlus 5. All right, so now we're up to the camera, which OnePlus sold sort of as the big feature of this phone, dual cameras. So I'm going to show you guys some sample shots here really quick from my photos album of my OnePlus 5 review. I made an album as I usually do for these full reviews. I'll show you guys the slideshow so you can see the quality here. We'll come back and talk about a couple of these and my overall impressions of the camera. All right, YouTube, we're back. Let's go ahead and talk about a couple of those shots that you guys saw. So first I want to talk about the dual cameras and the actual telephoto zoom capability. You'll notice in some of the shots that I took one photo and then one that was zoomed in. Now, one thing that I noticed in a lot of my shots is that when I was in low light, you're not actually using the telephoto lens, you're just getting some digital zoom from the main camera. My friend Tim Schofield, he did a video explaining how this works, showed a nice demo. You can actually see that if you go into the info here on the picture, you'll see this is f1.7, and in the info for this one, the one that's zoomed in, that's also f1.7. So those were both taken from the main camera, even though I hit the 2x button to zoom in because there wasn't enough light to use the telephoto lens. That's something that came up over and over again in a lot of the photos. You'll also notice that even in stores here, I would say this is not even that low of light, there is a little bit of softness and a little bit of noise to the photo, especially on the edges. That's something I noticed quite a bit. At night, there's even more. This photo I took out here at outdoors at Tempe Marketplace. The color is also off a little bit compared to photos I took with the Galaxy S8. A couple of other ones. This was probably the best night shot. Got some nice colors here on the tree without too much noise. This is another one I took at night, low light. If you zoom in, there's quite a bit of noise here, especially around the edges and the top of this particular fire hydrant. It's pretty tough to tell where some of the edges are around the bolts on the top and on the side of the fire hydrant. So definitely in low light, it struggles in my opinion. It's definitely not going to be on par with the Galaxy S8 and the S8 Plus. Now, in good lighting, it can take some good photos. I took these photos, and I was very impressed with the OnePlus 5. This was in excellent lighting outdoors with the Arizona sun right over top while I was taking the photos. And overall, they were pretty good. But you can see in this white one, still some softness near the edges. So even in perfect lighting, you can get some noise and some softness overall. This photo I took here, this macro shot, actually was with the zoom lens, the telephoto lens. And you can actually see here, this particular shot, it does a pretty good job when you can use the telephoto lens and you can use that portrait mode. But I'm not a huge fan of the portrait mode as averse to having a wide angle camera. I'd prefer the setup of the G6 because I find the wide angle just a little more useful. And then I took a selfie shot for you guys because people always want to see them. I don't really know much about reviewing selfie cameras. You know, if it can take a decent shot that's well lit, then I'm happy. It seems to have done a pretty good job taking a selfie there. So overall impressions of the camera, looking at these photos, I think it's mediocre. I don't think it's particularly that great. Compared to the S8, the G6, the Pixel, I'd put it below all of those, below the iPhone, because in some shots outdoors, you still get some softness, you still get some noise, and that's a little disappointing considering that they overall hyped the camera so much. I also don't think the dual camera is really as impressive as they made it out to be, especially with the telephoto lens not even working in situations where you have super low light. Now I realize the iPhone also does that. That's why I would prefer a wide angle versus telephoto. Anyway, the interface itself, just to mention, is very easy to use. If you want to zoom in and take a photo, it's very easy to do from 1x to 2x just using this button here. And again, depending on the lighting that you get, whether or not that's going to be telephoto or digital, you know, it's kind of hard to tell. You can cover up the telephoto lens and then see which one you get. Other things on the side here, HDR, flash, everything's really easy to access. So OnePlus did a good job of not burying any of the basic settings too deep. If you slide out here, there are other things like Pro Mode, time-lapse, slow-mo, etc. if you want to get into the fancy stuff. And then the real nitty-gritty settings are in here as well. You can put a OnePlus watermark on there. Don't know why you'd want to do that. But notice that OnePlus doesn't turn that on by default. I talked about the Xiaomi Mi 6 and complained about how that was on by default. At least they don't turn that on by default. Anyway, overall, the camera is not terrible, but for this price point, I was expecting a lot more, especially considering that OnePlus hyped it up so much. You guys can let me know what you thought of the photos from the slideshow below. The next thing, Bluetooth radios. Quite a few people have talked about this on Twitter to me, and I also had this issue. When running Bluetooth on this phone, I've had my headphones disconnect quite a bit, and I also tried it out with Android Auto for a little while, and that also disconnected occasionally, more than my Pixel. So I think there might be some issues with the Bluetooth radio in the OnePlus 5. Hopefully that could be fixed with a software update, but that's always kind of tricky with Bluetooth radio issues. That's just one aside that I wanted to mention. Hopefully they'll mention that and talk about it. Advanced and differentiating features here. I always like to mention anything that's special about the phone. There really isn't a killer feature, you know, that's going to knock something like the Galaxy S8 the G6 out of the park. The main thing is the software. If I had to talk about a killer feature for this phone, I would say it's this amazing Oxygen OS software. I like it better than even stock Android on the Pixel. That's how much I like their software. But there isn't something amazing like the Infinity display on the Galaxy S8. There isn't something that's going to wow people and say, I have to buy this phone. That's why the majority of people who buy this are enthusiasts who know how great the software experience and the overall performance is going to be. Availability of accessories. So this is always worth mentioning because I think a lot of people buy flagships like the iPhone and the Samsung phones because they know there's accessories. There aren't that many great options out there. From OnePlus, you can buy cases and sort of little shells, and I recommend checking those out. But if you want third-party options, my friends at Tudia and my friends at OtterBox sent me out these 3 cases. All 3 are very good, which I'll link below. I've been using all 3 of them. The OtterBox is probably the best one for overall hard drop protection. These 2 Tudia cases are great if you want something that's a little more minimal. Otherwise, I haven't found any that are really amazing third-party options overall. So accessories are limited. You know, that's going to happen anytime you don't buy an Android phone that starts with Samsung, but they're not too bad, and OnePlus does give you some options to buy from their site. And the OnePlus first-party accessories, they're not priced too badly. So the final thing here is the pricing, the value, and customer support. So the base model costs $479. You get 6 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of storage. This model here in Midnight Black, 8 gigs of RAM, 120 gigs of storage is going to run you $539. That's more than an LG G6 that you can buy right now. I just sold a brand new LG G6 for $480 on Swappa. I don't think this phone is quite as good as the G6 for the price because of some issues like waterproofing. The G6 has a better camera overall. The only places where the OnePlus 5 really kill the G6 are in software, and it's a bit smoother. But LG really stepped up their game. The G6 is quite smooth this year. Software is not terrible. So if you want better camera and you're the average user, I'd probably recommend the G6. I think the OnePlus 5 is the second best phone around this $500 price point, right behind the G6. So if I had to recommend this to people who are Android enthusiasts who care about software a little more than the camera, I would definitely recommend the OnePlus 5. My main concern that I always have when recommending OnePlus to a friend who's not an enthusiast is the customer support that you get from OnePlus. They just don't support their phones like Samsung and LG. They're not as big of a company, of course, but issues like the jelly effect, those sorts of things where people have problems and they're not happy with their purchase, if it's not a critical issue like the 911 reboot issue, sometimes OnePlus has a propensity to not address those issues publicly, and then they deny people returns, make it a difficult process. Personally, you know, that customer service worry is enough to scare away most average consumers, and I really would like to see OnePlus up their game if they really want to try to compete, and I think they have the tools to compete when it comes to their hardware and software, but I'd like to see them step up their overall customer support and their presence when it comes to having issues with their product instead of just brushing them off and ramming down their PR campaign down our throat. All right, guys, so that's my full review. Overall, I really like the phone as an Android enthusiast. You guys can let me know what you think about it. It's not going to be the #1 phone I recommend to the average user, mainly because it's not on any carriers and the reasons I just mentioned there. I appreciate you guys checking out the video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy my content. Find me at dopetechdaily.com, Google+, Instagram, and Twitter. The links in the description. I appreciate you guys checking out this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching.